You got your Bible? Let's read. We're going to be reading from Esther chapter 7, 8, 9. Esther chapter 7 is Haman hanged instead of Mordecai. Esther chapter 8 is Esther saves the Jews. Esther chapter 9 is the Jews destroy their tormentors. I'm going to be reading from the King James Version, starting at Esther chapter 7, verse 1. So the king and Haman came to the banquet with Esther the queen, and the king said again unto Esther on the second day at the banquet of wine, what is thy petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? And it shall be performed, even to the half of the kingdom. Then Esther the queen answered and said, if I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we had been sold for bondmen and bondwomen, I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. Then the king Ahasuerus answered and said unto Esther the queen, who is he, and where is he, that thirst presume in his heart to do so? And Esther said, the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen, and the king arising from the banquet of wine in his wrath, went into the palace garden. And Haman stood up to make request for his life to Esther the queen, for he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. Then the king returned out of the palace garden into the place of the banquet of wine. And Haman was fallen upon the bed whereon Esther was. Then said the king, will he force the queen also before me in the house? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. And Harbon, one of the chamberlain, said before the king, behold also the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king, standeth in the house of Haman. Then the king said, hang him thereon. So they hanged Haman on a gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified. I'm reading now Esther chapter 8. On that day did King Ahasuerus give the house of Haman, the Jews' enemy, unto Esther the queen. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was unto her. And the king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. And Esther spake yet again before the king, and fell down at his feet, and besought him with tears to put away the mischief of Haman the Agagite, and his device that he had devised against the Jews. Then the king held out the golden scepter toward Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king and said, if it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the king seemed right before, and the things seem right before the king, and I be pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews which are in the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that shall come unto my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred? Then the king Ahasuerus said unto Esther the queen, and to Mordecai the Jew, behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and him they have hanged on the gallows, because he laid his hand upon the Jews. Write ye also for the Jews, as it liketh you, in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring, for the writing which is written in the king's name, and sealed with the king's ring, may no man reverse. Then were the king's scribes called at that time in the 3rd month, which is in the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day thereof. And it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded unto the Jews, and to the lieutenants, and the deputies, and rulers of the provinces which are from Asia, from India unto Ethiopia, 127 provinces, even every province according to the writing thereof, and unto every people after their language, and to the Jews according to their writing, and according to their language. And he wrote in the king Assyria's name, and sealed it with the king's ring, and sent letters by post on horseback, and riders on mules, camels, and young dromedaries, wherein the king granted the Jews which were in every city to gather themselves together, and to stand for their life, to destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish all the power of the people and providence that would assault them, both little ones and women, and to take the spoil of them for a prey upon one day in all the province of King Assyrius, namely upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. The copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, and that the Jews should be ready against the day to avenge themselves on their enemies. So the posts that rode upon mules and camels went out, being hastened and pressed on by the king's commandment. And a decree was given at Shushan the palace. And Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in his royal apparel of blue and white, and with a great crown of gold, and with a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. The Jews had light and gladness, and joy and honor, and in every province and in every city, whatsoever the king's commandment and his decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a good day. And many other people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them. I'm going to read now the last chapter, which is Esther chapter 9. Now, in the 12th month, that is the month Adar, on the 13th day of the same, when the king's commandment and his decree drew near to put in execution, and the day of the enemies of the Jews hoped to the power over them, to have power over them, though it was turned to the contrary, that the Jews had rule over them that hated them. The Jews gathered themselves together in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Assyrius, to lay hand on such as sought their hurt, and no man could withstand them. For the fear of them fell upon all people, and all the rulers of the provinces, and the lieutenants, and the deputies, the officers of the king helped the Jews, because the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. And for Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame went out throughout all the provinces. For this man Mordecai waxed greater and greater. Thus the Jews smote all their enemies with the stroke of a sword, in slaughter, in destruction, and did what they would unto those that hate them. And in Shushan the palace, the Jews slew and destroyed 500 men, in Pashametha, in Dalphim, in Asath, in Porshta, in Adillah, in Rathram, in Peshmath, in Rizai, in Veshtadai, the 10 sons of Haman, the son of the Hamathath, the enemy of the Jews, slew they, but on the spoil laid they not their hand. On that day, the number of those that were slain in Shushan the palace was brought before the king. And the king said unto Queen Esther, the Jews have slain and destroyed 500 men in Shushan the palace, and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now, what is thy petition? And it shall be granted thee. Or what is thy request further? And it shall be done. Then said Esther, if it please the king, let it be granted to the Jews which are in Shushan to do tomorrow also according unto this day's decree. And let Haman's 10 sons be hanged upon the gallows. And the king commanded it so to be done. And a decree was given at Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons, For the Jews that were in Shushan gathered themselves together on the 14th day, also in the month of Adar, and slew 300 men at Shushan. But on the prey they laid not their hand. But the other Jews that were in the king's provinces gathered themselves together and stood for their lives, and had rest from their enemies, and slew of their foes 70 and 5,000. But they laid not their hand on the prey. On the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th month of the same rested they, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews that were in Shushan assembled together on the 13th day thereof, and on the 14th day thereof, and on the 15th day of the same, they rested and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore the Jews of the villages that dwelt in the unwalled towns made the 14th day of the month of Adar a day of gladness and feasting, and a good day, and of sending portions to one another. And Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters unto all the Jews that were in all the provinces of King Assyrius, both nigh and far, to establish this among them, that they should keep the 14th day of the month Adar, and the 15th day of the same yearly, as the days wherein the Jews rested from their enemies, in the month which was turned unto them from sorrow to joy, and from mourning unto a good day, that they should make them days of feasting and joy, and of sending portions one to another, and gifts to the poor. And the Jews undertook to do as they had begun, and as Mordecai had written unto them, because Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had devised against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast pur, that is, the lot, to consume them and to destroy them. But when Esther came before the king, the commandment by letters that the wicked device which he devised against the Jews should return upon his own head, and that he and his son shall be hanged on the gallows. Wherefore they called these days Purim, after the name of Per. Therefore, for all the words of this letter, and of that which they had seen concerning this matter, and which had come unto them, the Jews ordained, and took upon them, and upon their seed, and upon all such as joined themselves upon them, so as it should not fail, that they would keep these 2 days according to their writing, and according to the appointed time every year, and that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, every family, every province, and every city, and that these days of Purim should not fail from among the Jews, nor the memorial of them perish from their seed. For then Esther the queen, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai the Jew, wrote with all authority to confirm the second letter of Purim. And he sent the letters unto all the Jews to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Assyria, with words of peace and truth, to confirm these days of Purim and their times appointed according to Mordecai the Jew and Esther the queen had enjoined them. And as they had decreed for themselves and for their seed the matters of the fastings in their cry. And the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book. I have read Esther chapter 7, chapter 8, chapter 9. Esther chapter 7 is Haman hanged instead of Mordecai. Esther chapter 8 is Esther saves the Jews. Esther chapter 9 is the Jews destroy their tormentors. If you want to hear more about this, you can definitely follow me on social media platforms. On Facebook, it's MIN Shafan. It's MIN Shafan. On TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram, it is Minister Shafan. Minister Shafan's out.